I never thought I'd be kicked out of my own kitchen, but what my daughter-in-law did next left everyone speechless, including my son. Stay with me, because the real shocker is still to come. Before we continue, if you haven't subscribed yet, do so to stay up to date with the most shocking and real stories happening around you. You know, I always thought my kitchen was my sanctuary, my little slice of heaven, where I could whip up a mean lasagna or sneak a cookie without anyone judging me. It's the one place in the house where I feel completely at ease, surrounded by the familiar clatter of pots and the comforting aroma of simmering sauce. I've spent years perfecting my recipes, collecting mismatched mugs, and organizing my spice rack just so. My kitchen is more than just a room. It's a reflection of me, my history, and all the love I've poured into my family over the years. But last Sunday, that all changed, and not in a way I ever expected. It started out like any other Sunday. The sun was shining, the birds were chirping, and I was looking forward to a quiet afternoon. I'd just finished folding the laundry and was heading to the kitchen, thinking I might treat myself to a cup of tea. And maybe, just maybe, a slice of that chocolate cake I'd hidden behind the broccoli in the fridge. Don't judge, sometimes a woman needs her secret stash. As I rounded the corner, I expected to find my son Mark, maybe raiding the fridge for leftovers or sneaking a handful of grapes. Instead, I was greeted by a scene straight out of a cooking show. If the cooking show was hosted by a drill sergeant, there in the middle of my kitchen was my daughter-in-law, Jessica. She was surrounded by pots, pans, and enough groceries to feed a small army. Bags of onions, tomatoes, and bell peppers were scattered across the counter. My best wooden spoon was clutched in her hand like a magic wand, and she was barking orders at my poor stand mixer, which was whirring away at top speed. The air was thick with the smell of garlic, and something else I couldn't quite place, maybe cumin, and the sound of chopping sizzling, and Jessica's voice filled the room. I stood there for a moment, taking it all in. My kitchen, my sanctuary, had been transformed into a bustling command center, and I hadn't even been consulted. I cleared my throat, trying to get her attention. Jessica, what is going on here? I asked, doing my best to keep my tone light, though I could feel a knot forming in my stomach. She didn't even look up from her chopping. I'm cooking for my family tonight. Please get out of my kitchen now, she said, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. The words hung in the air, sharp and unexpected for a moment. I wondered if I'd misheard her. My kitchen, get out. Was this some kind of joke? I glanced around, half expecting Mark to pop out from behind the pantry with a sheepish grin, ready to say, "Just kidding, Mum," but no. He was nowhere to be seen. It was just me. Jessica and the chaos she'd unleashed. I tried to process what was happening. Wait, her kitchen in my house? Did I miss a memo? Is there a new law that says mothers-in-law are banned from their own kitchens? I mean, I know times are changing, but this was a bit much. I took a step closer, trying to assert some authority. Jessica, I appreciate that you want to cook, but this is my kitchen. Maybe we can work together, I offered, hoping to diffuse the tension, but she just shook her head, barely glancing in my direction. I have a lot to do, and I can't have anyone in my way. I need space, please just go relax or something, she said, her tone clipped and final. Relax in my own house while someone else took over my kitchen. The nerve. I felt a mix of emotions, confusion, frustration, and, if I'm honest, a little bit of hurt. I've always tried to be a good mother-in-law. I bite my tongue when Jessica rearranges my living room or insists on bringing her own salad to family dinners. I even let her take over Thanksgiving last year, though it nearly killed me, to watch her put marshmallows on the sweet potatoes. But this was a step too far. I hovered in the doorway, unsure of what to do. Part of me wanted to stand my ground to remind her whose name was on the mortgage and whose recipes had been passed down for generations. But another part of me, the part that spent years trying to keep the peace, wondered if it was worth the fight. After all, it's just one meal, right? Maybe I could let it go just this once, but as I watched Jessica commandeer my favorite saucepan and toss my carefully labeled spices into her bubbling pot, I felt something shift inside me. This wasn't just about dinner. It was about respect, about boundaries, and about not letting myself be pushed aside in my own home. I realized then that this was more than just a kitchen squabble. It was a battle for my place in the family. So I did what any self-respecting woman would do. I straightened my shoulders, took a deep breath, and prepared to reclaim my territory, because if there's one thing I've learned over the years, it's that you can't let anyone, no matter how well-intentioned, walk all over you, not in your own kitchen, and certainly not in your own life. And as I stood there watching Jessica stir her sauce with my spoon, I couldn't help but wonder, how did we get here? And more importantly, how was I going to get my kitchen and my dignity back before I could even process the audacity of being told to get out of my own kitchen, in my own house by my own daughter-in-law, in walked Mark, my son, my baby, the one I'd raised to know better. He strolled in with a grin on his face, clapping his hands like he was at a Broadway show, and the star performer had just hit her high note. That's right, honey. Finally someone put her in. He started, but he never got to finish that sentence, because as if the universe itself had decided to intervene on my behalf, the blender on the counter suddenly let out a sound like a jet engine and exploded. I mean, really exploded. 1 second, Jessica was blending her famous tomato sauce, and the next, there was a red geyser shooting up to the ceiling, splattering the cabinets, the floor, and most impressively, the dog, who looked absolutely delighted with his new tomato bath. Jessica shrieked. Dropping the spoon she'd been wielding like a sword, Mark ducked hands over his head, as if that would save him from the flying saucer. And me, I just said, stood there frozen for a split second, trying not to laugh. I mean, what else can you do when your kitchen turns into a scene? From a food fight movie, there was tomato sauce dripping from the light fixture, pooling on the floor and running down the cabinets in slow, sticky rivers. The dog, bless his heart, was licking his chops and wagging, his tail clearly thinking this was the best day of his life. I could almost hear him thinking, finally, these humans are getting it right. For a moment, the three of us just stared at the mess. In stunned silence, Jessica's face was a mix of horror and disbelief, her hands still raised in the air as if she could somehow stop the sauce from falling. Mark, ever the comedian, looked like he was about to make a joke, but one glance at my face must have told him now was not the time and me. Well, I was trying to decide whether to laugh, cry, or just grab a mop and start cleaning, but underneath the chaos, there was something else brewing, a deep, unsettling fear that I was losing my place in my own home. You see, it wasn't just about the mess, or even about Jessica's takeover of my kitchen. It was about the way Mark had clapped for her, cheered her on, as if I was the villain in some family drama. I'd always prided myself on being a good mother-in-law, the kind who offered help but didn't meddle, who shared recipes but didn't insist on doing things my way. But in that moment, with tomato sauce dripping from the ceiling and my son applauding my exile, I felt like a stranger in my own house. Was I just a guest now? Someone to be shuffled off to the living room while the real family took over? Jessica finally broke the silence, her voice trembling with frustration. This is a disaster. I can't believe this happened. Your blender is ancient, Mom. Why don't you ever replace anything? She shot me a look, as if explosion was somehow my fault for not having the latest kitchen gadgets. I bit my tongue, resisting the urge to point out that my ancient blender had survived 3 decades of fatigue. Millie dinners, birthday cakes and holiday feasts, without ever once erupting like Mount Vesuvius. But I could see she was embarrassed and maybe a little overwhelmed, so I just nodded and reached for a towel. Mark, ever the peacemaker when things got sticky, literally and figuratively grabbed a roll of paper towels and started dabbing at the dog, who was now rolling on the floor in pure tomato bliss. Well, that's one way to add flavour, he joked, trying to lighten the mood. Jessica shot him a glare that could curdle milk. and he wisely turned his attention to the cabinets. Instead, as I wiped sauce from the counter, I couldn't help but think back to all the times I'd cleaned up messes. In this kitchen, spilled milk, flour explosions, the time Mark tried to make pancakes for Mother's Day and ended up with batter on the ceiling. Each mess had been a memory, a story we'd laugh about later. But this mess felt different. It felt like a turning point, a moment when the balance of power in my own home had shifted, and I wasn't sure how to get it back. I glanced at Jessica, who was now frantically scrubbing the floor, muttering under her breath about ruined dinners and impossible mothers-in-law. I wanted to reach out to tell her it was okay, that kitchens are meant to be messy, and that family is about more than who's in charge. But I also wanted to stand my ground, to remind her and Mark that this was still my home, my kitchen, and I deserved a little respect. As we worked together in awkward silence, I felt my heart pounding in my chest. Was this what it meant to get older? To slowly fade into the background while the next generation took over? Was I destined to become a guest in my own life? Watching from the sidelines, as others made the decisions, the thought filled me with a mix of fear and determination. I wasn't ready to give up my place, not in my kitchen and not in my family. By the time we'd cleaned up most of the mess, the tension had eased a bit. Jessica apologized. Mark made a few more jokes, and the dog, now mostly clean, curled up at my feet with a contented sigh. But as I looked around at my once pristine kitchen, I knew things couldn't go back to the way they were. Something had changed, and I was going to have to decide what to do about it, because if there's one thing I've learned, it's that sometimes you have to fight for your place, even if it means getting a little messy along the way. I stood there, tomato sauce, still drying in streaks on the cabinet doors, my heart pounding in my chest. The kitchen was quiet, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the occasional drip of sauce from the ceiling. Jessica was standing across from me, arms crossed, her jaws set. In that stubborn way I'd come to recognize over the years, Mark hovered near the sink, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else, maybe even back in the blender's line of fire. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment settle on my shoulders. This wasn't just about a ruined dinner or a messy kitchen. This was about respect, about boundaries, about the invisible lines that run through every family and every home. I knew I had to say something, and I knew I had to say it right. Jessica, I began, keeping my voice as calm as I could manage. I appreciate you wanting to cook for your family. I really do. But this is my kitchen, my pots, my food, and if you want to use it, you need to ask. The words hung in the air, heavier than I expected. I could see the flicker of surprise in her eyes, quickly replaced by a flash of defiance. She straightened her back, her arms tightening across her chest. Well, maybe it's time you let someone else take over. She shot back, her voice sharp and unwavering. Oh, the nerve. I could feel my blood pressure rising, my cheeks getting hot for a split second. I wanted to snap back, to remind her that I'd been running this kitchen since before she was born, that I'd cooked more meals and cleaned up more messes than she could possibly imagine. But then, like a whisper from the past, I heard my mother's voice in my head. You catch more flies with honey than vinegar. She'd always been the peacemaker in our family, the one who could turn a brewing storm into a gentle rain with just a few kind words. I took another deep breath, letting her wisdom settle me. So instead of raising my voice, I smiled. Not a forced, tight-lipped smile, but a real one, the kind that says I see you and I'm willing to meet you halfway. How about we cook together? I suggested, my tone light but sincere. You show me your recipe. I'll show you mine. Maybe we'll both learn something. For a moment, Jessica just stared at me, her eyes searching my face for any sign of sarcasm or condescension. Mark looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor, his gaze darting between us as if he was watching a tennis match. The silence stretched on, thick and uncomfortable. I could feel the tension in the air, the unspoken words and old resentment swirling around us, but I held my ground, refusing to let anger or pride get the better of me. Finally, Jessica's shoulders dropped just a little and she let out a long, shaky breath. Fine, she said, her voice softer now, but we're doing it my way. I grinned, feeling a wave of relief wash over me. Deal, I replied, rolling up my sleeves. But you're going to have to teach me how to use that fancy food processor of yours. Mine's more of a relic than a tool at this point. We set to work side by side, the awkwardness slowly melting away as we chopped, stirred, and tasted. Jessica showed me how to make her family's secret meatball recipe, complete with a pinch of cinnamon and a splash of red wine. I taught her the trick to my lasagna, layering the noodles just so and always. Always using fresh basil. We laughed when the dog tried to steal a meatball off the counter, and we rolled our eyes in unison when Mark offered to supervise from the safety of the dining room. As we cooked, I found myself watching Jessica in a new light. She was determined, yes, and maybe a little bossy, but she was also passionate and creative. She cared aptly about her family, about making meals that brought people together. I realized that in her own way, she was trying to carve out a place for herself, just as I had done all those years ago when I first married Mark's father and inherited this very kitchen. Maybe we weren't so different after all. At one point, as we layered the lasagna, Jessica glanced over at me, her expression softer than I'd seen it in a long time. You know, I always wanted to learn how you make your sauce, she admitted almost shyly. Mark talks about it all the time. I smiled, feeling a lump form in my throat. Well, it's about time I passed it on, I replied, handing her the wooden spoon. Just don't tell anyone my secret ingredient. She grinned, and for the first time, I saw a glimmer of friendship in her eyes. By the time we finished, the kitchen was a mess again, but this time, it felt different. The air was lighter, the tension gone. Mark wandered back in, sniffing the air appreciatively. Smells amazing, he said, giving us both a sheepish smile. Maybe you two should team up more often, and I exchanged a look, and for the first time, I felt a sense of hope. Maybe this was the start of something new, a partnership, a truce, maybe even a friendship. As we sat down to eat, I realized that sometimes the hardest battles lead to the sweetest victories. I hadn't lost my place in my home. I just found a new way to share it. And as I watched Jessica take her first bite of lasagna, her eyes lighting up with delight, I knew my mother was right. A little honey goes a long way. We spent the next hour cooking side by side, and I have to say it was nothing short of a comedy show. If you've ever tried to share a kitchen with someone who has their own way of doing things, you know exactly what I mean. Jessica and I were like two conductors, trying to lead the same orchestra, her with her high-tech gadgets, and me with my trusty old wooden spoon. At one point, she tried to show me how to use her fancy food processor, and I nearly sent a handful of parsley fly. Nung across the room. She laughed so hard she had to lean against the counter, and I couldn't help but join in. It was the first time in a long while that we'd both let our guards down, and it felt good, like a breath of fresh air after a summer storm. Of course, it wouldn't be a true family cooking session without a few more mishaps. The dog, who had already made out like a bandit with the tomato sauce, managed to snag a second helping of meatballs when Jessica turned her back for just a second. I swear that dog is smarter than half the people I know. Mark wandered in trying to look helpful, but mostly just getting in the way. He offered to taste test every single thing we made, which I suspect was just an excuse to sneak bites before dinner. At one point, he tried to juggle 3 lemons and nearly took out the salt shaker. Jessica rolled her eyes, but I could see the smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. Even I had to admit, it was nice to see him acting like a kid again, if only for a moment, as the kitchen, filled with the smells of simmering sauce and baking bread, something shifted between Jessica and me. The tension that had been simmering all afternoon seemed to melt away, replaced by a sense of camaraderie. I hadn't felt in years. We swapped stories as we cooked, her tales of growing up in a bustling household with 3 sisters, my memories of learning to cook at my mother's side, flour dusting our noses and laughter echoing through the house. We compared notes on everything, from the best way to chop an onion to the secret ingredient in her family's meatballs, a dash of cinnamon if you can believe it. For the first time, I saw her not just as my daughter-in-law, but as a woman with her own history, her own traditions, and her own dreams for her family. By the time we pulled the lasagna out of the oven, the kitchen was a mess. Flour on the floor, sauce splatters on the stove, and a trail of breadcrumbs leading straight to the dog's bed. But none of us cared. We were too busy laughing, too. Busy savouring the moment, Jessica even admitted with a sheepish grin that my lasagna was better than her mother's. "Don't tell my mum," she whispered, and we both burst out laughing. It was a small victory, but it felt like a big one. For the first time, I felt like we were truly family, not just by marriage, but by choice. Mark, for his part, finally apologized for his earlier performance. He shuffled his feet, looking sheepish, and said, "Sorry, Mum. I shouldn't have clapped, and I definitely shouldn't have taken sides." I gave him a look that said, "You're not off the hook yet," and handed him a stack of dishes. "You're on dish duty tonight," I declared, and Jessica backed me up with a firm nod. He groaned, but I could see the relief in his eyes. Sometimes all it takes is a little humility and a lot of soap to set things right. As we sat down to eat, I looked around the table and felt a wave of gratitude wash over me. It wasn't a perfect day, and it certainly wasn't a perfect meal, but it was real. It was messy and loud and full of love, the kind of day that makes all the hard moments worth it. Jessica and I shared a smile over the lasagna, and I knew we'd turned a corner. We might still butt heads from time to time, but we'd found a way to meet in the middle, to share the kitchen and the family we both loved. After dinner, as Mark tackled the mountain of dishes and Jessica packed up leftovers for her family, I found myself thinking about all the women out there who've had to reclaim their space or their voice in their own homes. It's not easy, is it? Sometimes it feels like you're fighting a losing battle, like you're being pushed aside by the very people you love most. But here's what I've learned. You don't have to shout to be heard. Sometimes all it takes is a little kindness, a little patience, and a willingness to see things from someone else's perspective. And maybe, just maybe, a really good lasagna. So ladies, here's my question for you. Have you ever had to reclaim your space or your voice in your own home? Oh. How did you handle it? Did you stand your ground, or did you find a way to compromise? Thank you for watching this video. Share your thoughts in the comments. I truly value every story and every voice. Don't forget to subscribe to Tears and Strength and share this video with your friends.